Hi, everybody. My name is John Malloy. I also have an artist name, Flux. I'm an illustrator and a fine artist. I do digital work, analog stuff with paint and ink and pencil, color pencil, obviously, and marker. I'm also a principal designer for Newell Brands, the owners of Sharpie and Prismacolor and Elmer's and all those good things. And basically, this is a portrait class. So we're gonna have two parts. The first one is we'll try to get half of it done and see how far we get. If we don't get half done, that's fine. I'll probably just pick up where we left off a little bit further on next time. But I want to go through some of the basics of just going from sketching and to coloring and that sort of thing. And because I know a lot of times for beginners, it can be kind of hard to know where to start. I have a little sign here that I want to share with you because I feel like it's a nice, easy way to get across ways that you can share your work. So when you're finished, if you want to tag at Prismacolor, make it with Michael's hashtag or hashtag Michael's classes. And you can also follow me. My handle is Flux Artist. That's with Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff. I guess with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So if we could switch over to the other one. All right, bear with me for a second.
John, while you're switching, we have people tuning in from everywhere. We've got West Virginia, Tennessee, Ohio, Vegas, Mexico.
Wow, awesome.
California, Maryland, India. Hi guys, thanks for joining.
Hi everyone. All right, so I'll go ahead and get started. You know, when we sent out the materials list and other things, I believe there was a reference photo, and that's this one. I printed it out, and I printed it small, and I'll just tell you why I did that. There's a basic reason. A lot of times when you're trying to draw something, it's easier to go from small to large. The reason being, and you'll understand as we go along, and maybe some of you have had experience, you'll know, it's a lot easier to see shapes from far away than it is up close. Like if I hold this person's picture up to my face, I'm not going to know where the eyes go or anything like that. So it's a lot easier to see things from far away and kind of make out shapes and anatomy and stuff like that. Another way to do that is to squint, and we'll get into that also. Some of the materials I believe involves H pencils. This one is a 4H pencil. You could use a 2H pencil. This is a turquoise Prismacolor, which you can get at Michael's. And the reason it's called H is that's the harder lead. B is a softer lead. I don't really know the meaning of where those come from, but what I do know is that the harder leads draw a lot lighter. So they're a lot easier to erase, and they don't really show up as much when you start putting down your colors. So if you use the B pencil, like regular number 2 pencil is a 2B, so that's usually a little bit darker. You can use it, but I would just suggest drawing a little bit more lightly. So I guess to start, I'm going to go ahead and look at this picture and kind of figure out, okay, where are my basic shapes? The biggest shape would be the person's face. So that's an oval. And I'm going to start by just lightly drawing an oval. And if you notice, where the chin is, that kind of tapers in a little bit. So if you look at the bottom, it gets a little bit smaller. So I'm basically trying to make sure that that's in there. Now, one thing that might be a little difficult is that because this is a light pencil, it might be a little hard to see. So just, write in the chat if you can't see, maybe we'll go a little bit darker. So that's just basically the face. I'm not going with the head or anything else yet. And then I'll try to figure out where the eyes go by, if you squint and see a line, you can kind of get a section of where the eyes would go. So it's about, like here's the half the face, just above half. So if I figure my half of face is here, it's going to go just about there if I just start with a line, right? Now, I'm not worried about detail right now. I'm just trying to get out, the ideas of the sections of the face and where the parts of the face go. But I am going to go ahead and take that and start by drawing an oval for one of the eyes. And I'm not worried about detail. I'm just going pretty loosely. And then I'm going to draw you know, another oval for the other eye. So here's something interesting too. If you're drawing from a photo, a lot of times people's eyes, actually 99.9% of the time, no one's eyes are exactly or symmetrically aligned. So you may have to do a little finagling if you're working from a photo and you're super detail oriented. But that's kind of why working loosely works really well for this sort of thing. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of put in where the bridge of the nose would be, figure out, you know, where the eyebrows go. And again, just kind of putting in some loose lines, almost like the foundation for the overall drawing. Think of it as like, you know, you're building a house and you want to put down just some simple, basic, you know, structure. That's what we're working with right now. So next up, I'm going to go and kind of figure out where the nose would go. Um, and don't worry about the face shape right now. We might probably will end up changing that. Really, the focus is on where this nose is in relation to the eyes. So just kind of working in the shape, not worried about detail. I want to know where that bottom of the nose is going to go. And then in relation to that, I'm going to look at where the mouth would go. So there's, you know, not much space there. Kind of put in an overall shape. And notice I'm sort of working in angled lines. I'm not worried about detail. This might be where the top of the lip or the bottom of the upper lip goes. This is where the bottom lip starts, right? So what you've noticed probably is that my jaw is really big. That's fine. Don't worry about it. Now this is the time to change things. So when we actually go in with color, that's when we're going to put in the real drawing. But this gives us an opportunity to, you know, fix anything where we think something might be off. And then that's where our handy little friendly eraser comes in. You can just erase some of those lines. And just a reminder, I'm working on Bristol smooth paper. This is something you can get, you know, at Michael's as well. I believe it was on the list. All right, so now that I've got sort of the overall face shape, I'm gonna work on the ear. And the ear, you know, typically, depending on where you shoot a person, an ear will usually go from the eye to the mouth. But because of the angle, it goes a little bit higher. So what you can do is just to sort of help figure out where things go, look at where the top of the ear is in relation to the eye or the eyebrow. So it's probably going to be like right about there. And then bring it down, bring your line down. And the bottom of the earlobe pretty much lines up with the bottom of the nose. So this really comes in handy for when you're drawing anything really is, you know, when you've started kind of looking at other parts of your drawing to figure out where to put the next step. All right, so I've got the ear, and then that tells me where to start with the back of the head. So essentially, I'm just going to start here, bring this up, you know, for the top of the head, and bring a line down like that. It's kind of got she's got a part in the middle there. All right, and then now kind of figuring out where the neck's going to go. Coming down here, where it bends in is a little bit below the chin. So again, just using different parts of the drawing to figure out where to go next. All right, so I've got my neck. And now I'm gonna go ahead and put in just loosely these earrings here. All right, same for this side. And I wanna line those up pretty good. So I can just kind of take my pencil like that. And you know, the great thing about this is if you're following along, that's great. If you feel like it's going too fast, this will be live. This will be on YouTube later and on Michael's website, so you can refer to it later, fast forward, pause, whatever you need to do to get going. But that's essentially the overall sketch. Now I'm going to move into some color. So the way that I'm going to do this is, if any of you ever heard of base tones, mid-tones, and shadows, you'll understand where I'm coming from here. But you know, when working with color pencils or any kind of material like this, even markers, it's best to work from light to dark, because if you make a mistake with a darker color in the beginning, then you can't go over it. If you start off light you know, it's pretty much foolproof, or, you know, it's a little more mistake free. So we're going to start light, and I'm going to do this in sections. And the one thing I will say to keep in mind is that it may not look like anything at first. It's probably not going to look like anything for a while, but you will be happy with it when it's done. Um, and the first base color I'm going to start with, base, is for the skin tones. And that is 914. It's cream. So essentially, I'm going to start by coloring in and looking at her face. So the way I got these colors too is, you know, if you squint, you can see there's dark brown in the shadows, there's more oranges in those midtones, and there's yellows in the highlights. So highlights, base color, same thing in this case. You know, and if you kind of, like I said, when you squint, you can sort of see colors better that way. And that's where I came up with these colors. So it may be a little hard to see, so I'm going to press down to make it more dense. But the thing to keep in mind is wherever you have white areas, leave those blank. And try to have your color pencil fade off where those areas are. So really the only white areas are, you know, at the top of the eye, eyebrow, and over the bridge of the nose. We've got some lighter areas on the nose itself in the center too. And if you notice the strokes that I'm using, I'm trying to follow the form of the three-dimensional shape of the head. Like, so I'm taking my, you know, pencil and drawing in this direction. It helps give the illusion of depth and dimension for the head or anything you're drawing. If I were to just go like this, you know, kind of like all at one angle, it doesn't necessarily look as dimensional, and it, you know, it doesn't look dimensional at all right now, but when we start adding other colors, that's when you'll see the dimension come through. So I want to get rid of this line here because it is in one of the highlights. A little tip about your eraser is if, you know, you've got some stuff on it, just wipe it off on the side. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, since I have a good idea where things are, erase some of that so I can go in and add more of this base color. All right, and so I'm leaving this area white up here. And really going in with the yellow here. And the same goes for the eye. You know, right now we don't have the detailed eye in there, but just leave that area white. And you can, wherever you see like the darker colors, the brown, just go ahead and fill that in with the yellow, the base color, because this color is going to add to the other darker colors as we put them in there and give it more depth. If we were to just go in with the darker color, it wouldn't look as layered or dimensional. All right. So again, I'm following the form of the face with the strokes of the pencil. And filling it all in. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to add those in the chat. And so, and also pay attention to, like, right here, it might look like there's a highlight, and depending on your printout, it may be a little bit different. But there isn't, it's really just yellow there. So try to be aware of not having too much white left behind, only where you really see highlights. Another thing to keep in mind is, you know, everybody's had different kinds of levels of art instruction here. So what I'm doing may be different from what you've learned, but hopefully, you know, you can kind of combine those things or just take something from this, and that's great too.
No questions yet, John. I think everybody's just enjoying it.
Okay, cool. All right, so now that I'm finishing up the face, I'm gonna move on to the neck. Um, and what's cool is, you know, if you notice, I'm not sharpening my pencil right just yet. Actually, this sort of beveled edge that comes from overuse comes in handy, especially when you're doing fills. So I'm actually putting a little bit of this yellow in the lips too, you know, even though they're red, just to sort of tie them into the face skin better too when we're done, when we get to that part. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and erase the pencil line for the chin, the jawline. Got some of that left behind, and that's okay. That's gonna be covered up with shadow anyway. All right, here.
Hey, John, we did just get one question.
Yeah.
Katerina asked, did you color over the eyebrows as well, or use the eye sockets to define the brows?
Um, I did color over part of the eyebrow, just basically because we're gonna build that up with color on top. Um, but yeah, I mean, they're there not just for placement, but also that's where they're gonna be. Um, but yeah, basically wherever you see a dark color, you know, I would say anything on the face should have this yellow underneath. I hope that answers the question. All right, now I'm gonna sharpen a little bit, excuse my shaky camera, and move on to the ear. So the ear, there's very little highlights in it, just one small section. So I'm going to mostly just fill all that in. And even so, I'm gonna leave like some of the sketch there. Like I kind of like that look. Depending on what you want to do, you might want to erase those lines. It's up to you. Um, and the thing is too to remember is, you know, unless you're really trying to be exact, and drawing the person, you know, maybe it's somebody you know, you might want to be super exact, but it isn't. Definitely don't worry so much about it being perfect because, you know, part of making art is that you can be expressive about it. And sometimes what you come up with is much more interesting than real life. All right. So I've got that pretty good here, I think, with all the yellow. I might want to go back in just, you know, where it's the densest and just add a little bit more. But I think I'm pretty good here. All right. So now that I've got that down, I'm going to move on to the next base color in the skin, which is peach or 939. You know, when I was a kid, peach was always the crayon that I used for skin, you know, or at least to start. No matter what the skin color, it's kind of like a base color in any skin color. But now that, you know, I'm older and I've been doing this a while, I realize that there's a lot more than just peach to start with. So the yellow is really nice because it'll make the skin glow. All right, so now I'm going to go in with the peach color and start coloring in there. So I grabbed the peach, you know, literally if you hold this up to your picture, you'll see that there's peach in there. Same with the yellow, excuse me. I'm gonna sharpen it a little bit. All right. And remember, the same with the yellow, just make it so that it fades toward your highlights. So it gets more dense as you get into the shadows. See what I mean? And it kind of, there's like a gradient as you get lighter. And just be aware of that. And again, following the shape of the face, you know, the form, just going around like this. And we'll probably, I mean, at the end of all this too, you know, don't forget, like, you can always do finishing touches. If you're afraid something's not going to look right, you know, you can always go back as long as, you know, you've got enough light area to work with and fix things, you know. So I would say when you start, lighter the better. And that way you can always go back and adjust if need be. All right, some more here. And the same goes for, here's where my eyebrow is going to be. I'm going to color that in. And there's also some of that, peach color coming up right there. Sharpen. And here, I'm actually going to start thinking about the eyelid. So right now, I don't have that drawn in, but I'm looking at that shadow right there, and I'm going to start to draw above the upper eyelid and leave some of that yellow for the highlight. And then really whatever I do in this black area doesn't matter so much because it's going to be black at the end anyway. It's the white area that you got to be careful of. So fill that in. Same goes for here.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
We got a question for people who don't finish on pace with the class today. First of all, there is going to be a part 2. Everybody, so you guys can come back and see John finish. But can they share kind of how far they got with you or their finished pieces
Oh yeah,
with
absolutely.
you, and maybe get your feedback? Do you want to share your handle again?
Totally. Yeah, they can DM me. Whatever, that's great. Anytime.
It's at Flux Artist on Instagram, right?
Yes. And for those of you that don't know the date, the second class is going to be on December 3rd. It's a Friday, basically the same time as this one. So, all right, go ahead and add this in. So again, I'm following around the eye here, and there's a little bit of shadow just below the eye. And then we've got some peach color actually just under the eye, not a whole lot. And then over here on the right side of the face. So before I get to that, I'm going to actually do the other eye and some of the nose. So, there's some shadow here, right in the center of the nose, top center. And the funny thing is, you'll probably notice if you haven't drawn a lot of faces, now that you're doing it, you're going to see these things, things that you'll look out for, where the shadows are, just the structure of a face in general. All right. And you'll notice too that, some of these lines are visible. If you don't want that, there are things that we can do. One of them is we're going to use a blender. I believe it was listed in the materials list, and you can get it at Michael's. It's just a colorless blender Prismacolor makes, and it works really well. Another way to blend is actually to use like lighter colors. Even a white colored pencil will work. So the issue with a white colored pencil is it could end up lightening your colors more than you want it to. But in many ways, it gives you even softer blending than the blender does. So it's really, and it also depends on what kind of paper you're using. So I think a colorless blender works really well on like this smooth paper, whereas on like a paper that has more tooth or more grain, the white would probably work better. All right, so I'm leaving some of that light in here, right just below her eyebrow. And I'm gonna come down for the upper eyelid. And remember, the thing to keep in mind is that this is not supposed to look like anything just yet. So don't worry. It's pretty cool once you go in and actually add like more colors and the shadows and things like that. And you'll see why it's important to have all these colors layered in. All right, so same thing here. I'm just going to follow the lower eyelid, creating that. Right here, the side of the nose has some of this color.
Hey, John, have you colored anything in her lips yet? Or is that just white? Right
There is
now?
a very faint, like, scribbling of the yellow. So I just
Got
put
it.
a little bit of that in there because just so it ties into the rest of the face.
Thanks.
Sure. Now here, I want to keep my pencil tip pretty sharp just because I'm getting into some tighter detail here. So now I'm going to start working on creating the detail of the nose with just the color. So I've got the nostril, left nostril here. And depending on your paper, so if you see the way that I'm just getting rid of the excess colored pencil wax with my hand, some paper is not as forgiving to do that, so you can always just blow on it. Um, and I definitely would recommend wiping like regular soft, like a B pencil, because that will definitely leave streaks in your drawing. But for color pencil on smooth Bristol or smooth paper, it works okay. All right, so I'm kind of looking back at where I was before and I'm seeing, I can go even a little bit darker. Yes, we are going to add darker colors, but it's best to not just rely on that. Like it'll give you more depth if you, go as dark as you can in the darker areas with your lighter colors, if that makes any sense. So, right nostril, same deal. Just kind of drawing it with the color. And even filling in where there's going to be black for now. All right, so now I've got that part finished. I'm going to move down to the cheeks. And again, just kind of starting off lightly, especially where the peach transitions into the yellow, um, just so I get a nice gradient that way and then get darker, just, by putting more pressure down to get darker as I get further out. There's even some peach in here.
Hey, John,
Yeah.
just a general Prismacolor question for you, because I feel like you might know this.
Yeah.
Darlene in the class has some older Prismacolor colored pencils, and she said they just struggling with them breaking. Do you think it's because they're older? Have you struggled with the same thing? Like, is it good to get new ones every once in a while, or do you think it's
Yeah,
just
it is probably
pressure?
that would be my guess.
Yeah.
The other thing too is just, um, even when you're going dark, try not to press too hard because that may also make them break. Um, and I don't think it's not a fault of the tool. It's just, I think everything has its limits. So again, it's either because they're older pencils or, there might be too much pressure being put on them. So that's what I would say about that. All right, so again, I'm following the structure of the face. You can see like all the shading kind of follows her face around. And adding a little more where I see it. All right, sharpen my pencil. Move on to the right-hand side. So here, she's got some peach tones in here. And they kind of come over to the right-hand side.
John, we got a
Yeah.
comment from Lester that their strokes look more like lines and yours look a little bit more blended. Do you have any tips for that? Or I feel like
So
yours might also look more like lines up close too.
they do, yeah. Here, I'll even
Yeah.
show you. They definitely are a little bit streaky. And what I'll say is once we get the blender out, it'll help smooth those out, whether you're using a blender or a lighter, pencil. And honestly, I think it's okay to have those kind of streaks if you want to do something super smooth, it would obviously take a lot longer than what we're doing in this, since this is really a beginner class. But you know, I would not be moving through this as quickly if I wanted to make it really, really smooth. So yeah, I think just for, you know, what we're doing right now, it is totally okay to have those streaks. But again, the blender will help smooth that out too. All right. So moving down just here under the mouth, you'll notice there's a little bit of light right there. And right where her chin is, there's definitely a lighter area. So trying to be cognizant of that and get underneath. All right, keep sharpening. And we'll get into the other parts of the face too. Just working on the skin right now. So try to connect this area. Okay. And again, leaving that area almost white for the highlight on her chin. And continue around the face. So now we've got basically the second base color for the face. And I will say that the base colors, I think, take the longest, because you're sort of, like I said, creating the foundation. You're putting the base color down, almost like when you know, I'm trying to think of another analogy here. But if you're a painter, you know, if you work in painting, that base color is the first thing you put down, like the gesso or whatever else you're using. Sorry, my dog is shaking in the background. He just sleeps all day, all night too. All right, now moving down to the neck, and there's a lot of shadow here. So I can pretty much fill except for just where, you know, sort of her clavicle starts there and just above it. But I don't even think I'm going to go that far down. So go ahead and fill this in.
So I've got a couple questions while you do that.
Yeah.
One is, do you have color recommendations if you're drawing a lighter skin tone? John actually also I think around this time last year, right, John, did a different portrait class, and that might be a good one to watch because I think that was a lighter skin tone.
Yes, for sure. That's a great call. Yeah, I think if you want to see that, then you could do the same. You know, watch that to find out where to start. But also, I think that these two colors, the ones that I'm pulling right now, the peach and the cream, are actually a good base color for any skin tone. You know, they'll work. So
thanks. One other question. Pam asked, if the pencil isn't as sharp, will it be smoother strokes?
Yes and no. I think it can be, but it also gives you sort of wider strokes than if you don't. So I think many times if you're working in detail, especially, having a very sharp point gives you a smoother, you know, transition, smoother strokes. So. All right, so I'm just gonna finish up the neck here. And I'm also, you know, in areas that are, you know, might not look as smooth, especially in the shadows, it's not that big of a deal, because they're going to be covered by another color anyway, and they're going to be blended into another color. So you'll see what I mean once we move on to that section. All right, so I've got pretty good amount of this second base color in. And then I'm just going to move on to the ear. So for the ear, I'm actually going to be a little bit more abstract. You know, I'm not more this is the area that I really want to focus. So, you know, if you think of in terms of like a picture and some of it's blurry on the outside, But you know, a portrait, the face is really the part that stands out the most. I'm sort of using that same logic here where I'm not as concerned about the ear. Just in this case, I mean, you can do whatever you want, you guys. Like, it's just this in particular, I think kind of gives it sort of a, I don't know, a looser expressive feel when you do it this way. So yeah. And I'm leaving that spot for the earring. Okay. All right. So I think we're doing pretty good here. So now I'm going to move on to the blender. And we're going to do the blender a couple times. So the blender, this is one, obviously it's been used a lot. It's PC 1077. It's just a colorless blender. And if you take it and go to where the lighter areas connect with the darker and press, give pretty good pressure here, you'll notice that it gets rid of some of those lines we were talking about earlier. And this tool comes in handy in many ways, and also especially when you're doing like really detailed things. It does a nice job of smoothing things out. So I'm just going to do that to all of this. I'm not so concerned with the darker parts because they're going to have another color in there anyway, and we'll probably go back in and blend those too.
John, we got a question. If you don't have a colorless blender, I know you said you could use a white colored pencil. Got a question if you could use a Q-tip, or do you have any other?
Yeah, I don't think a Q-tip would work as well. The reason this works well is it's basically the binder for, you know, a colored pencil, like the wax part of it without a color. And I think something like a Q-tip or something too soft wouldn't have enough pressure to work with. So yeah, I think either just a lighter color pencil or the blender is probably your best bet. All right. And then sort of working down toward the neck. And I'm going to pull this up close so you can sort of see the difference in where I blended and where I haven't. So for instance, here, this part of the neck has been blended, this hasn't. And you know, again, not worried about being perfect because we're going to bring in other colors as well. But at least this helps smooth some things out. And then the same for the ear. Just going to go ahead and kind of blend that overall. All right. So now I'm going to put a little bit of base color in the eye. The eye, you'll notice, is a brown color, but it has orange and even some of this yellow in there. So the yellow, I'm going to use the same one, the cream, but kind of leave a little area of white, maybe a little hard to see for the highlight. It's just going to go in generally right there. Not trying to be perfect. Same here. Because if you look here, I'll hold the picture up. I'm basically just doing right in the center area of the eyes. I'm not worried about those edges just yet. Okay.
John, we got a couple quick questions about the blender.
Yeah.
One, do you know if you can use the blender for watercolor? Or maybe, Audrey, I'm thinking maybe you mean watercolor pencils. Do you know?
Sorry, can you repeat that again? Apologize.
I've got a question if you can use the blender for watercolor.
Oh, not really. Yeah, you could probably use it for watercolor pencils before you add the water, but you know, it's really more for a pencil-based tool. All right, so now I'm going to go into the lip. This one, I've got PC 929, which is pink. And I'm going to actually just draw in some of the detail for the outline because this outline will eventually be darker, but for now it kind of tells me where to go. So I just put in some of the lip like that and kind of make sure I'm looking at my reference to figure out where the detail goes. Some of this might even change, some of where I've done some of the skin tone, you know, for instance, like here, I'm gonna go ahead and color that in because, you know, I basically kind of went, left too much white there. And that's okay, you know, so all of this is basically just constant trial and error as you go. That's the only way you're gonna get better at any of this stuff. All right, so I've got kind of the outline for the lips there. And then using the pencil, if I kind of go in the direction of, you look at lips, generally the form of them goes from the mouth outward, right? So if you notice, I'm basically making lines in that same direction. Okay, so there's very little white there. I think you could pretty much almost just fill this up. But again, not pressing too hard. We just want to kind of get it so it fills up lightly.
Hey, John, can you repeat the color you're using?
Yes, it's pink, 929. And then even in the lower lip, you know, it looks like there's white, but there really isn't. It's mostly just pink in those highlights. Okay, so now I'm going to actually go in a little bit darker with it by putting more pressure in the darker areas. So you notice it's not red. That's what eventually we want, but it is more dense. It's richer, and we want to have that as a good foundation for the rest of the lip color. And you know, some color pencils, depending on the color, I'm not sure why this is, tend to blend better without a blender by themselves. I think pink is one. There are other ones out there. I'm not, you know, like I said, I don't know the science of it, but just so you know, it's kind of your luck of the draw there. All right. So again, leaving these areas open, and really just making the rest of that dark. Okay. So now we've got the base color for the lip, and then finally we're going to do the base color for the hair. So the hair is going to be 1018, and that is, I can read it, it's pink rose. The reason being is because we're kind of going a little expressive. You know, obviously this picture, there's some blue in the hair, there's some other stuff, but I just feel like the pink is a nice little base color for it. When I did this, I actually just used this as a base color and some black and like a dark blue, indigo blue for the hair. So really, almost like the ear, I'm not as concerned about detail. I'm just kind of going in there, filling it up, and you know, we can make it even a little more scribbly when we get to doing that part. So, you know, the thing is too, to remember to keep in mind, this is going to build up and it'll eventually, you'll be, you know, a lot happier with it. Don't worry about it not looking perfect right now. You know, part of this is being patient, because, you know, you'll understand once the colors build up that it looks much more realistic, and it's much more satisfying than if you were just kind of going to go in with dark colors right away. All right. So now we're pretty much done with our base colors. Now I'm going to move on to the midtones. So for the skin, find it here. We're going to go with 1034 or goldenrod. The reason being is obviously you can see there's some gold colors in her skin too. So we've got that, yeah, with these two, but we're just going to go a little bit deeper with color. So starting in the darkest part and working out to the lighter area, you'll notice we're just adding some gold tinges to the skin. And if you see areas that you want to, you think should stay pink, just leave those like that. Really, this is more, this is also a part of the foundation, even though it's a mid-tone. So we don't want it to be the main star. And in some ways, this will even help blend too. So, as you're putting more colors in, you're blending your colors that are existing right there. So I'm going very lightly until I get to the darker areas. And hopefully you can start to see, this face coming together. At least your structure. And just kind of going down here to the chin, moving on to the neck. And the one thing, if you notice what I'm doing, is I'm still following the same strokes. So I would recommend that. I personally prefer that. I mean, if you want to do the other way, if you go in the other direction, you're going to get cross-hatching, and it almost looks like plaid marks in your drawing, which, depending on what you're doing, you might be happy with that. I tend to think it doesn't look as realistic if you do that. So, all right. Now that we've got that, we're going to move on to, let's see. $9.43. So this is kind of a step darker. It's also called burnt ochre. So start in your darker area, and what you'll see is that if you go very lightly and even get lighter, less pressure as you get out toward the highlight, just really nice transitions between your colors. And you'll also notice that it's a good build of colors. Like if I were to just take this burnt ochre, see how boring that looks? But because it has the cream, the pink or the rose, and the goldenrod underneath, it makes a whole new color that is really beautiful. So this is, now you'll start to see why we're building our colors this way. And if you feel like, you want more pink, you can always go back in with your rose color and add more of that. It's not like you're locked down to just sticking with this. So, and I'm saying that because I might actually want to do that too. For now, also, I'm going to start with the eyebrows since it is a darker color that I'm working with and I want to get it drawn out. So it looks like the eyebrows she have a little blue in them, have a little black, but at least this will give us somewhere to start.
Hey, John, just a quick time check. We've got about 10 minutes left.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so we got the eyebrows put in there. And same goes for the eyes. Since I got like a sort of a darker mid-tone, I'm going to start drawing in the eyes themselves too. Kind of looking at that shape around the eye and getting that drawn in. This is just going to help everything now that I'm starting to work in detail. So I'm going to go ahead and color that in. You know, this is going to be black and all that on top, but at least for now, I know where it's going to go. All right. So same with the lower eyelid. Add that shadow, even though we're not into shadows just yet, but add that mid-tone, I should say. Here, you know, the shadow of the eyelash. All right. And then I'm gonna move over here to the nose. Start to put this in here. And just being careful of where the edges of the shadows are and making sure they still stay fairly soft. Yeah. I'm gonna sharpen, since I'm getting down to detail again. I want to give this left nostril some definition. At least start to. And remember, squint when you're looking at your reference to see, you know, where your shadows are going to be, where your colors are going to, you know, what colors are there, where to put it in. I'm going to put this down for the nostril shadow, 2, and then bring this down for the bottom of the nose. All right. And then here, some more mid-tone. And this nostril, mid-tone there. Some mid-tone here on the side of this eye. And even a little bit here, top of the nose. All right, so more shadows here on the right eye. Kind of drawing in the eyelashes a little bit there and drawing in the eye a little bit as well. So I know we only have a few minutes. You know, I would love it if you guys, you know, get to a good spot and then kind of, you know, get to this place. And then by the next time we finish, you have something to go on right around the same place where I'm at. That way you can follow along and kind of figure out where to go next. And I think, you know, we did pretty well today, just getting to where it needed to be. So we can just pick up where we left off next time. All right, so if you notice, there's a little bit of a shadow here. It's very subtle under where her eyelash is. So I just put that in there. And now I'm gonna go ahead and bring down some mid-tone here for the cheek and even add definition to, take this opportunity to add definition to the side of the face. All right. Start with the jawline here. You got some shadow underneath her lips here. And then put in some darker color at the jawline. So don't be creeped out by your person with no eyeballs. I swear it'll look cool when you're done. Just, this is part of the process. And you notice what I'm doing is I'm, you know, following my strokes, the form of the face, here. And I am crossing some of the strokes, and you know, it just so happens that it worked out there, and that's fine too. But it's so light that it's not really that noticeable. Okay, going dark here on the left side of the face. And yes, I'm getting some lines, and that's okay. We can go back with the blender afterward. All right, so that's pretty much the midtones, at least the start of the midtone here. And now I'm going to move it on to the neck. So the neck, got some shadow underneath. See how far we get in the next few minutes. Go ahead and draw that out. And same here, you know, the shadow's pretty dark right where the jawline hits the neck. So I'm going to go in with a lot of pressure, go in densely here, and then, you know, lift it up a little bit because I don't want it to be as dark. And then kind of just taper it down. There's a little bit of shadow along the side of the neck here. And here. And, you know, it might look a little too brown, so I'm going to go back in with rose and add a little bit of that too. But I won't do that now. I'll probably do that before the next class just to get that in there. See how much we can show. We got 2 minutes. All right. So now I'm going to move on to the lip, the midtone of the lip. The midtone of the lip is, find it. All right. 937, which is Tuscan Red. It looks pretty dark, but it actually is not that dark once you draw with it. So, but in some ways, you can go dark with it, and we should, because obviously there's a lot of deeper tones in her lips. So I'm going to start getting a better point on my pencil. And snap. Start with the outline. So next time when we pick this up, my pencil doesn't want to sharpen. We'll start here with the lips and the midtones there. So I'm going to leave it at that. And that's it. So hopefully you guys can join me next time to finish this up. And you'll bring your drawing with you. I'd love to see everything when it's all done. But thanks for joining. Bye, everyone.